Man, we'll come down there. Woo. All right. Good morning. Acts chapter 27. Going to continue as we have in Acts. Guess what? Next week, Acts is over. So anything you haven't read, got some catching up to do. Right? It's a great book, that Acts is. Written by the physician, Luke. This week's lesson is, they mentioned that, there's a lot of detail in the lesson. And I mean, some that a lot of us just skim over, right? Let's get to the next climax, the high point, right? The spiritual part, right? So I'm going to read it anyway because there's a lot of just great detail in how much Paul, the apostle, went through just to reach the next point where he could share his testimony, right, for the Lord Jesus. Now, remember, Paul's on his way to Rome. Well, that's his next destination. That's his desire, to get to Rome, right? We've talked about this, the center of the universe right now. Rome is in the country of Italy. Rome, Italy. They actually mention that in Scripture. So, I just happened to be thinking about that this morning. So last week, I'm going to do a quick rundown of last week. Remember last week, Paul had given his testimony the third time in the book of Acts. And this time to Festus, the proconsul. I guess that's a big long word for the guy in charge, right, of that area of the world for Rome. And King Agrippa pretty much had the same job, but he was in the neighboring country. I don't know, country or area, region, right? These guys were apparently friends, acquaintances, right? Festus thought if he had King Agrippa listen to Paul, then he would get a little more insight or direction towards what he should write down when he sends Paul on to Rome. So he's going to send some guy down at Rome who's been, totally innocent of anything. They're going to look back at him and say, who is this clown, right? Sending this guy to Rome to waste the emperor's time. That'd be Augustus Caesar, right? So, anyway, they hear his testimony, and what happens? Oh, no, we'll read it. Chapter 26, we'll finish up that. We read it last week. Chapter 26, verse 31. And when they were gone aside, now we're talking about Festus and Agrippa. They'd already heard it from Paul again. When they had gone aside, they talked between themselves, saying, this man doeth nothing worthy of death or of bonds. Then said Agrippa unto Festus, he said, this man might have been set at liberty, which is what? Free. Set free. Right? If he had not appealed unto Caesar. So Paul has said in prior discussions, he says, send me to Caesar. I want to talk to Caesar. Right? He has asked for a trip, a trip to Rome. Today's lesson, he is going to get it. Right? The ultimate cruise. Isn't somebody here going on a cruise soon? Not on a grain ship, right? So that's where we're going to begin reading today in chapter 27. Okay? So there's a lot of this. I'm gonna maybe read sort of fast, right? I'm going to assume that some of this you've read, or you've already read it, okay? And we're going to go there, right? So we're going to sail to Italy and begin doing that. So verse 1, chapter 20 says, and when it was determined that we should sail into Italy, he's saying we, man, this is Luke saying this, right? That means what? Luke is with Paul. How else do you interpret that, right? When it was determined that we should sail into Italy, they delivered Paul and certain other prisoners unto one named Julius, a centurion of Augustus' band. Okay, so Julius is a centurion. We've talked about those guys again, right? They're sort of the been there, done that. Soldiers, right? Get in charge of several men. So here he is on the boat, taking these guys, not just Paul, but some others, to Rome. Right? Now, it's not obvious right here, but we'll see when we get over here. There's a lot of guys on this boat. Sam's not here, and I sent him a picture, but I really wasn't quite sure that was a good picture. Yeah, I wanted a picture of this boat, what it looked like back then. Now, Rome was not backward when it comes to modern things, right? Remember, they had the aqueducts that ran water for miles through concrete? Yes, miles. I mean, it's almost like that's better than my water system at my house. But this boat, apparently, according to the scriptures, and we'll jump there, 276 people, at least on the last boat that he was on. That seems like a pretty big boat, right? Yeah, and they probably don't have rooms for everybody, right? You think they were rowing? Yeah. Well, there was Paul, Luke. There's another guy here named Aristarchus. He's kind of what Paul referred to as his fellow prisoner, right? Came with Paul to Jerusalem. But there's these three guys, not to mention other prisoners. Those prisoners having guards or soldiers which watch over them. Then there's Julius, who has in charge of Paul. Okay? Then there were shipmen who drove the ship. These soldiers did not drive the ship. All right? They just held the spear. Right? And then cut your head off if you argued with them, right? So anyway, it's a pretty big boat. And they are in for the tour of their lifetime. Verse 2, and entering into a ship of Adramyttium. Okay? Adramyttium. I don't even know how to describe that to you. It's a name. It's a place. It's a way they recognize, right? Yeah, a port. I don't really know. We launched, meaning to sail by the coast of Asia. One, Aristarchus, a Macedonian of Thessalonica, being with us. Okay, so they're getting in the boat. They're leaving Caesarea, and they're heading all the way over to Rome. Lots of ways it goes. Now, a couple things you got to be aware of this time is, I don't know if you recognize it, where your house sits in the wintertime, how the wind blows. Does the wind mostly blow to one corner or one end or one edge of your house? Yeah. Yeah, do you have windows on that side of the house? Well, I don't, because if I did, I'd freeze to death, right? Most of the winds here, right? At least they're southwestern, coming from the southwest, okay? Anything north of the equator, right, in the world, that's the same. And if you're south of the equator, they go the opposite direction. But there's a certain time of year where you just don't drive a boat. Even those guys back then knew that you didn't drive a boat past a certain time of a year. Occasionally, the winds would die. You could get in a boat. Because how did they drive these boats? The wind. Right. So if you want to go that way and the wind's blowing this way, Your boat's going to go the opposite way. So this time of year where these guys are traveling towards Rome is not a good time of year to be driving a boat. Unless maybe you're just going over to get you a Diet Pepsi at the gas station. These guys are going thousands of miles, okay? So it's a bad time. It's going to tell us here in a minute. There is a time, there is a day in the Jewish faith they call the Day of Atonement. Happens around end of September or something like that. I think it's end of September, right? Early October, whatever that goes. That is a bad time of year to be in a boat heading back the other direction as opposed to heading towards Jerusalem, right? At that point in time, things start to change. Winter starts to occur, right? Just like us here. Winter starts to occur. Wind starts to change. Anybody's wind blow yesterday all day long? Did at my house. Imagine being in a boat heading into that wind. I wouldn't get very far, okay? This Day of Atonement is a one-day fast, feast, actually one of the most important holidays, Jewish holidays, one of the most. It's a day of remission, right? Fasting, prayer. Correct me if I'm wrong, Olita. I don't know all the details, right? But it's a certain time of year. Paul knows that. Why? Paul's a Jew. He's Jewish. Okay. Just think about these things. And I'm thinking about these guys getting on a boat. Some of these guys are prisoners. They figure if they get there, they're going to get their head cut off anyway. So they don't care what they're getting into. Maybe they'll have a wreck and they'll swim away, right? But Paul had a mission from God to get to Rome, right? Let's continue. Verse 3. And the next day we touched at Sidon, and Julius, who is the centurion, right? Julius courteously entreated Paul, gave him liberty to go and to his friends to refresh himself. We talked about Paul, right? Remember when Paul was in prison at Caesarea? There was something interesting about Paul's, what's the word, Mike? House arrest. He had liberty. And he had friends could come in and see him, right? That's kind of interesting. Whoever they were. Aristarchus, I guess, was one of those. Luke was one. Well, when they would stop along the way, they weren't taking it's not a one-way trip. You know, if you're in an airplane, you have to get from here to Colorado, you may have to stop 2 or 3 times, right? Same on the boat. They'd stop places, and they would let Paul go see your friends. Go refresh. Pretty honest of Paul, for one thing. But don't forget, Paul has the mission. These guys don't have the mission. They're helping serve what? They're basically doing God's work. Taking Paul right where God wants him to go. Right? Okay, so if they stop along the way, Paul was able to get out of the boat, go see his friends. Or his acquaintances. They referred to it here. Okay, that was verse 3. I'm warming you up because they've just begun this journey. Verse 4, and when we had launched from thence, we sailed under Cyprus because the winds were contrary. Meaning what? They weren't agreeing with the way we wanted to go. Now we're going to mention a lot of cities here. If I had a map, here I'd share that with you. But these are probably cities you won't remember again until you read this yourself, right? And write it on your shirt sleeve because there's so many. And when we had sailed over the sea of Sicilia, just bear with me, and Pamphylia, we came to Myra, a city of Lycia. And there the centurion found a ship of Alexandria sailing into Italy, and he put us therein. Okay? So they bounce through a few places here, and they come to Lycia. That's the right word, right? Lycia. They take him off this boat, and they put him on another boat. This is a grain ship. Pretty big ship, right? These ships carry a lot of weight. Carry wheat for sale. So apparently carrying a lot of folks on the ship is not Such a big deal. Okay? And there, okay, let me see. Verse 7. And when we had sailed slowly many days, and scarce were come over against Cnidus, the wind not suffering us, we sailed under Crete over against Salmon. So what they're doing is they're navigating, right? However the wind works with them in order to get to their next location. I don't know if this is the route these guys always take if they were going there, or it just so happens to be this time of year.
This time of year they stayed close to the shore.
Right. At least far enough to where their ship didn't hit ground, right?
They knew eventually it would be in a storm somewhere.
Yeah. Okay. Good deal. Some of this is, okay. And hardly passing it, bear with me, hardly passing it came into a place which is called the Fair Havens. Nigh whereunto was the city of Lasea. Okay? Now, when much time was spent and when sailing was now dangerous, all right, here we're getting to the point where it's knowledgeable, right, even to the layman, right, when you want to be on a boat and when you don't want to be on a boat, right? Because the fast was now already past. The fast is the Day of Atonement. That's the holiday, the Jewish holiday. Right? Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur. For all you people that want to know what to really call it in the Jewish. Is that Hebrew? Is it? So now I know my first Hebrew words. Let me continue. Much time was spent when sailing was now dangerous because the fast was now already past. Paul admonished them. So what happens? Paul goes before them and says, look, guys, it's getting late in the year. Now, here's the way I'm trying to read this. These guys, I don't know what they think or how they interpret Paul, how much Julius knows or has heard Paul's testimony. But they don't know that Paul is the one wanting to go to Rome. Of all people, Paul does not want to delay getting there. Nor does Paul want to be killed on the way getting there, right? Out of some recklessness. But that's the last thing on his mind at the moment. But he's going to go to these guys and say, guys, it's not a really good time to get on a boat right now. And he said unto them, he said, sirs, I perceive that this voyage will be with hurt and much damage, not only of the lading and ship, but also of our lives. Nevertheless, the centurion, this is Julius, he believed the master and the owner of the ship more than those things which were spoken of Paul. Now, he's been really good to Paul, but according to him, he's going to go to the captain of the ship, right? Say when's good and when's not to go. So he's going ahead, not listening to this little tent maker from Jerusalem. Verse 12, and because the haven was not commodious to winter in, what are they saying? The haven, the fair havens, not commodious to weather in. It's not a good place to hang out in the wintertime. Maybe that was part of the argument. Not commodious to winter in, the more part advised to depart thence also, if by any means they might attain to Phoenix, and there to winter, which is a haven of Crete, and lieth toward the southwest and northwest. Okay, now I don't know what you're thinking when you see this, but just take my word for it, right? Wherever they were at, and Paul said, it's wintertime, shouldn't be traveling. They said, we're going ahead anyway. And they moved forward in the boat with intentions of me reaching Phoenix, right? Verse 13, and then verse 13, and then the lesson begins today. And when the south wind blew softly, supposing that they had obtained their purpose, loosing thence, they sailed close by Crete. So like Butch said, they're kind of, there are islands out there. I don't know how far they get from these islands. Yeah, but we'll talk about it in a minute. They do things on these boats, and they have a way of, woo, right, calling out from the boat. And somehow they measure the echo to help determine how close they are to land. Yeah. I've never done it. I have done it. I have played a lot in the mountains, right, with echoes, right? Hello, 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 hello. How many times did you hear, right? I don't know if that's the same. But they have a way of doing that. These are shipmen who know the stars in the sky, and they know how to measure the closeness. And they're sailing along, but verse 14 is where the lesson begins. It says, but not long after there arose against it a tempestuous wind called Euroclydon. Never heard that word before. Looked it up. So what the heck's that? Yeah, I did. I just the best I get is has anyone ever heard of a cyclone? It's kind of like an ocean type storm, circularly. It's almost like I don't know. How do you even compare a cyclone to a hurricane?
Large water spout.
Water spouts?
And what water spout is a tornado on water.
It's basically a hurricane.
Okay.
Because it lasted, what, how many days?
Well, at least 14 days. Or I think there's... Yeah. Yeah. So, guess what? This Euroclydon, whatever, if I accurately interpreted or read this right, it's one of those winds that makes big waves, right? So if you're on a boat and you're sailing, trying to sail into a wind that's not cooperating with you, and you're creating big waves, then all of a sudden you've got a lot of this going on, a lot of that, a lot of this, right? A lot of lack of control of a boat with a lot of stuff on it and a lot of goods to get from there. Now, here's what I want to say before I go any further about this lesson today. If I can say it right. God has a way of every day actively taking part in the outcome, right, of our lives. And you know that people that hang out with you sometimes get the benefit from that. I mean, even people that even your own kids, right? Thank God, Mark. Your own kids are benefiting just by your faithfulness to God. My own kids, and I have more that are out of fellowship than you. God's still taking care of them. He still has mercy on them. And I don't know, it's not because I'm deserving of that, but I'm thankful that he does. Paul is a perfect example here that we're going to see. A ship full of wild guys, characters, be taken care of through a terrible storm on a boat where essentially their chances are zero, right? For one reason, to get Paul to where he's going. For another reason, to be a testimony of what words he's going to say and how he knows when he admonishes these guys about instructions that God's given him that he should share with them along the way. Okay, don't bore you there. But that's the theme of this week's story. according to Sunday school lesson. But there's many more in here. Okay, verse 15. And when the ship was caught and could not bear up in the wind, we let her drive. So what do they do? Let her go, right, Mark? We can't steer it. We can't sail it. Just raise the rudders, just let her go. Okay. And running under a certain island, which is called Clauda, we had much work to come by the boat. Now, this may not be obvious to you, but these ships, they pulled their lifeboat behind them. I don't know if you ever seen them. They'd be a boat in the ocean. I don't know. I doubt they do that today. I can imagine being on a big cruise ship and then pulling like a little rowboat behind them. So whoever can get in. But they have lifeboats. I think they call them a skiff. Skiff, right? So whatever they're doing, they're going to get that rope, that skiff in close to home, right? Because they have to use that thing, and they're not going to be able to get into it out there in the ocean. So one of the jobs they begin doing is get that guy in here, because we're really starting to get worried about this. We have much work to come by the boat, which when they had taken up, they had brought up the boat. They used helps undergirding the ship, and fearing lest they should fall into the quicksands, struck sail, and so were driven. What they would do, that's a lot of words. It doesn't tell you that much unless you know ships. They would actually run ropes, cables, not metal cables, around the boat. Tighten it to hold it together, because boat's doing this. It's made of wood, right? Stuck together with what? Tar and, pitch, nails, spikes, right? Probably not very sturdy, especially the size. They would actually run ropes around the ships. Underneath, I don't know how they did it unless they were already run. And they would tighten them up, right, for the worst. So these guys are actually going into quite a dramatic exercise here. And when, 18, and we being exceedingly tossed with the tempest, the next day, they just lightened the ship. Meaning what? Let's get rid of some of the weight on the ship. So go get all the women and throw them in. Am I on the internet? I was kidding. Uh-oh. All right, they lightened the ship. And the third day we cast out with our own hands the tackling of the ship. Basically, all of them began, right? Cooperating. Get the heck this stuff out of here. They probably didn't care what they had. Anything that would say that. Verse 20. And when neither sun nor stars in many days appeared, and no small tempest lay on us, all hope that we should be saved was then taken away. Can you imagine being, I don't know. I mean, we've been in the daytime before, where a storm comes, right? And you say it feels like it's dark out, or it's getting dark. Clouds are dark. It's 3 p.m. These guys are in the ocean on a boat in the middle of nowhere. And it was dark. Clouds in the sky, no stars, no sunshine in the daytime. What do you think? What do you think is going through Paul's mind right now? Or Aristarchus or Luke's mind? What went through the disciples' mind when they were on the boat and Jesus was asleep?
I would say Paul was probably praying a lot for help, strength in this. The disciples were in different times, so they weren't praying, they just scared to death.
I don't think the disciples knew who Christ was at that time.
No.
And they weren't filled with the Holy Spirit.
Yeah.
But Paul knew who God was, and he knew he was on a mission, and it was going to be complete.
might get through this storm?
Let's find out. Verse 21. But after long abstinence, what? That just means, I guess it means without. Hey, that's the one I was. Oh, the Samson. Well, this, I don't know. Huh?
That was pretty.
It looks small. I think this little guy, that's a little guy, a person up there, right behind that dove or whatever.
That might be the one they towed behind the other one.
You think that's the lifeboat? These are the oars, right? I don't know. I don't think this is a lifeboat. I think this is maybe a poor representation, maybe of the size of the boat.
Yeah, they weren't going to be that big. I mean,
Huh?
they got them all crammed in there. They weren't huge ships.
Yeah, they're probably sitting pretty close to each
Right,
other.
that's it.
And they may not necessarily be out in the weather, right? I mean, there's a floor deck, right? Maybe just the sailors are running around up there. I don't know. But until they got a little concerned, right? So, hey, thanks, Janetta. I spent way too long trying to find an example of what this ship would look like. And, there were too many and too far apart, right, for me to take any confidence, really, that this is it. This is a picture of the boat. The guy took it before he left. It was on his cell phone, right? Sent it to me. All right. But after, verse 21, after long abstinence, Paul stood forth. Abstinence was what? I mean, he hasn't eaten for sure, right? Whether he was fasting or whether he had they were too sick at their stomachs to eat. Right? Okay. Paul stood forth in the midst of them and said, Sirs, you should have hearkened unto me and not have loosed from Crete and to have gained this harm and loss. Well, first of all, it's like your dad says, this is going to hurt me worse than it is you. But I'm doing this because I love you. Let's continue. Should not have loosed from Crete and to have gained this harm and loss. He says, and now I exhort you to be of good cheer. I exhort you to be of good cheer. For there shall be no loss of any man's life among you, but of the ship. Now, who's going to believe this guy? He's just a prisoner. But he says, shame on you. I told you so. But be of good cheer. We might lose this boat, but you guys will be all okay. Some of them say, right? Yeah, who's he? All right. Verse 23. For there stood by me this night the angel of God, whose I am, and whom I serve. Saying, fear not, Paul, thou must be brought before Caesar. And lo, God hath given thee all them that sail with thee. God says, you're going to Caesar. And the rest of these guys, they'll be okay. From an angel, or the angel of God. Okay, let me hurry along here. Verse 25 says, wherefore, sirs, be of good cheer, for I believe God that it shall be even as it was told me. That's what he was doing, Butch. Talking to the angel. Howbeit we must be cast upon a certain island. Now, that's almost prophecy in itself, right? We'll see. But when the 14th night was come, Mark and I were just talking about, 14th night was come, as we were driven up and down in Adria, about midnight the shipmen deemed that they drew near to some country. So what? These sailors get the idea or the impression that they're getting close to land or somewhere, and sounded and found it 20 fathoms. And when they had gone a little further, they sounded again and found it 15 fathoms. So that thing, they're not throwing, what are those little things you throw and come back at you?
Boomerang.
Yeah, they're not throwing a boomerang, right? There's some sort of a noise they make. I don't, if anybody knows more about this than me.
What they use is a plumb line.
A plumb line.
Yeah, they drop a line, a weighted line, until it touches bottom. And then they can measure.
Oh, that's another.
They're measuring the depth of the water.
Yay.
But he's talking about going in the shore.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's good, but that's a good thought too. Right?
That's the way they measured it, the depth. The ship could only go so far in before it runs to the ground.
Okay. They sounded again and found it 15 fathoms. Then, fearing lest we should have fallen upon rocks, okay? Let me reread this first. 29. Then, fearing lest we should have fallen upon rocks, they cast 4 anchors out of the stern and wished for the day. We're almost done here. This is really good. As the shipmen were about to flee out of the ship, when they had let down the boat into the sea, under color as though they would have cast anchors out of the foreship, Paul said to the centurion and to the soldiers, he said, except these abide in the ship, you cannot be saved. What's happened? The sailor says, we're close. Get that lifeboat. Or go. Huh? Yeah. They're hungry. They got a lifeboat. They're going to get in it. And they go for it. Paul says, wait a minute. Paul speaks to the soldiers. The centurion said, if they go and do this, it's contrary, right? We're lost. The soldiers cut off the ropes of the boat and let her fall off. Teach them. Boom. There goes the lifeboat. You're all on this ship together. Right? While the day was coming on, Paul besought them all to take meat, saying, this day is the 14th day that ye have tarried and continued fasting, having taken nothing. He said, wherefore I pray you to take some meat, for this is for your health, for there shall not be an hair fall from the head of any of you. When he had thus spoken, he took bread, gave thanks to God in presence of them all, and when he had broken it, he began to eat. You guys need to eat for your health. I'm going to eat. Paul begins to eat. Guess what? Then they were all of good cheer. They also took some meat. Paul's a good leader, right? And we were all in the ship, 216 souls. 276. And when they had eaten enough, they lightened the ship and cast out the wheat unto the sea. Remember, this was a grain ship, right? Yeah. So they're hauling grain and a bunch of prisoners that are going over there and get tried and murdered or killed, mostly for the sins that they create. So guess what? They eat and they grab the grain, throw it out. They're lighting the ship. Even more. According to the promise God had given Paul, right? We're about done here, so hang on. When it was day, they knew not the land, but they discovered a certain creek with a shore, into the which they were minded, if it were possible, to thrust in the ship. So I don't know what these guys see when you're a seaman, or what you're looking at. Apparently it's daytime. They're seeing some things that look close to like what might be an option to land the ship, right? Whether safely or not. Paul's already told them the ship was going to be of no value afterwards. Okay, we'll read these. It goes fast. And when they had taken up the anchors, they committed themselves unto the sea, basically saying, let the sea have it, right? Loosed the rudder bands, hoisted up the mainsail to the wind, and made toward the shore, Falling into a place where two seas met, they ran the ship aground. And the forepart stuck fast and remained unmovable, but the hinder part was broken into the violence of the waves. I could see this ship. I don't think this ship is just coasting. I think with the wind, the storm, I think it's moving pretty fast with this.
Front end was on rocks and the back end was loose and the wind kept it going like this.
Right. I think the boat went like that, right? Like Velcro, and then the back of the ship just took a beating, right, with the wind. Gotcha. Okay, this is not a lesson on shipping, by the way, but this is a lesson on the details that Luke put in his scripture regarding that. The soldiers' counsel was to kill the prisoners, lest any of them should swim out and escape. So I got to hurry. So guess what? These soldiers we talked about, what's their job? To get their prisoners to their destination. Anything happens to their prisoner, they let anything happen to their prisoner, then what? They get their prisoner's punishment. So they might as well just kill their prisoner before letting him get away. I'll read that again and I'm going to finish. And the soldiers' counsel was to kill the prisoners, lest any of them should swim out and escape. But the centurion, this is Julius, willing to save Paul, kept them from their purpose. Commanded that they which could swim should cast themselves first into the sea and get to land. And the rest, some on boards and some on broken pieces of the ship. And so it came to pass that they all escaped, all safe unto land. All 276 individuals on that ship escaped. That's hard to believe, isn't it? It's hard to believe. I mean, what I'm saying is just I guess while I'm reading this, I don't know, maybe I'm over dramatic, right? I like to visualize. I like to feel it. I like to when I go in to talk to the Lord. I like to imagine, feel. I want to see Him. I want to, right? Yeah, same with the reading. Go ahead, brother.
You like the detail like I do. I like to see it and then also say what was there.
That is the end of this week's reading lesson, right? And
Can you help us understand?
okay.
I mean, I'll say everybody's probably smarter than me. It helps me understand. You kind of tell it like it's story from the first of it to the last of it.
You want me to do that?
You do that.
Oh.
You do that, and I think that's good.
Well, I've said this before, and I don't say this, but a lot of people can do that, right? And I agree that the scriptures are easy. Are they easy to read? Really easy to read.
It sounds, you do good.
Huh? Well, the bottom line is this. We could take the best story, the best love story, the best shipwreck, the worst crucifixion, the greatest resurrection, the blessing of the Holy Spirit. Anybody could sit here and probably teach that. Couldn't they, Kitty? But you have to know it. You have to know it. You have to feel it. It has to be part of you, right? In fact, there's not a word in here. If you deny one word in this Bible, shame on you, right?
You say we're still going to be in Acts?
One more week.
Okay, because I want.
One more week. If you want to read ahead.
But more in Acts.
That's right. You're down the end. It's a great book. All right. If you want to, actually, we have to end. So. Just remember when you're out there, right? If you're a Christian, first of all, don't think by the end of this day God didn't have something to do with